You saw in that video what it took to be the champion. You have one day, you have one race, and there's only one champion. If I could swim 50 minutes in the open ocean off the coast of Kona in do the swim in about 50 minutes, get out of the water, bike 112 miles along the west side of the big island of Hawaii, which, as most of you know, is very hot, windy, desolate, not a lot of swaying palm trees and mai tais going on out there. It's very intense. I had to average 25 miles an hour, which is actually what Lance Armstrong had to average to win the Tour de France. Get off of my bike at 12:30 in the afternoon, the hottest point of the day on the hottest of all the Hawaiian Islands, run a marathon averaging 6 minutes and 10 seconds every single mile, I would be the Ironman champ. Anything less than that and somebody else is going to walk away with the title. But as any goal that is great happens, it usually evolves over time. And for me, that evolution started in 1982. At that point, I was 24 years old. I'd been out of college for 2 years, and I didn't really have any career direction in my life. But one thing that I was absolutely committed to doing was being in front of the television every Saturday afternoon to watch Wide World of Sports. You remember those days when the entire nation would stop to see what Jim McKay had to say about some amazing sporting event? Well, one Saturday in February, I was racing home because I was late to see the beginning of the show. And I turned on the television, and Jim was talking about this thing called the Ironman triathlon. I'd never heard of the Ironman or triathlon. And then he told the distances, 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike ride, and a marathon. And I thought, how many days is it going to take these people to finish this crazy thing? He said, they start at 7 and they have till midnight, 17 hours later to complete it. And the thought was, they have to be absolutely nuts. Why would you want to do something that crazy? But as I watched the athletes coming across that finish line, I was just drawn into the human drama of what these people who looked very ordinary were doing, this amazing, extraordinary event called the Ironman. And about 2 weeks after I saw that race on television, I thought, you know what? I want to go there and see if somehow I can cross that amazing finish line. Now, in 1982, it was a very easy process to get into Ironman. You called up the Ironman office. They sent you the application. You sent it in with a check and a photo, and you were in. As you know, very different than it is today. 6 months later, I was on the start line of that incredible event. At about 5 minutes to 7, I was floating in Kailua Bay with about 1,000 other athletes who were all there hoping to finish the race. And really, nobody from first to last knows what it's going to take to complete that day. We all train, but when the gun goes off, you just never know what's going to happen. Now, out of those 1,000 athletes, there's one that I want to highlight for you because he became my toughest challenge to becoming the Ironman champion. It was that gentleman named, Dave Scott. Now, in 1982, Dave was recognized as the best Ironman distance triathlete in the world. He'd won the race once. He was coming back hoping to win his second title. And Dave is one of those guys that is absolutely committed to doing everything he possibly can to have his best race. He had the best equipment that money could buy. He had a sports physiology degree from his university at UC Davis. He knew how to get his body fit. He was impeccable with his diet. As an example of what he would do, Dave in 1982 was a vegetarian, but he knew that endurance athletes needed a lot of protein. So to get the protein his body needed, he ate a lot of cottage cheese. Well, I think cottage cheese is pretty healthy. It's on every diet platter you see in the restaurants. Dave felt like cottage cheese had too much fat in it, so before he would eat his cottage cheese, he would stick it in a strainer and he would rinse it. If I'm going to win the Ironman, I've got to beat a guy who's willing to rinse his cottage cheese. Well, in '82, I wasn't thinking about winning. I was just hoping that somehow I'd be able to cross the finish line later in the day. The cannon sounded, all 1,000 of us headed out for the 2.4 miles of swimming. The course is lined with a long string of big orange floating buoys that mark the shortest distance from the start to the turnaround boat halfway through. Now, as you know, endurance athletes do have some smarts, and we all knew that that shortest distance was right next to that line of buoys, so all of a sudden 1,000 people are all trying to get on the freeway at once, and I was getting jammed and poked and shoved and held under the water, and I thought, I am going to die in the opening moments of this stupid sport. And I totally panicked. And I started sprinting. It was the only thing I could think of was just try and sprint away from the other athletes. Probably not the best strategy to sprint the opening moments of a day that can take 17 hours, but that's all I could come up with. Finally, as I got close to the turnaround boat, I found an open spot next to the buoys. I found another athlete who was cutting a steady course through the water, and I thought, all right, this is the only time you're going to do this thing. Just try and relax and enjoy it. We made the turn. We headed back for the second half of the swim, and I thought, I wonder where the leaders are. So I stopped to tread water for a second, and I looked up, and the only guy I could see was the guy whose feet I was on, and I thought, man, those top guys are so fast. They're so far ahead, I can't even see them. When I came out of the water, still on the feet of this guy that I'd been following now for about half the swim, we passed under the timing clock, which gives you your swim split and also your position in the race when you pass under the clock. When I went under the clock, I looked up, and the number next to my time was number 2. I was on the feet of the leader of the Ironman. Boy, this is a pretty good sport now. I thought, who am I following? I ran over, I looked at him. Do you want to guess who I was following? Dave Scott, the best guy in the world. Now I'm ecstatic. We threw on our cycling clothes. We headed out for 112 miles of biking. Halfway through the bike ride, I was still with Dave Scott, the best guy. We made the turn at Javi, we headed back, and I could see that we had a 5-minute gap on the next competitor. I'm with the best guy in the world. We have this huge gap. ABC is filming us. My friends back home are going to see me on TV. Now, I had never talked to Dave Scott before, so I figured, perfect time for an introduction. So I rode up next to him and I go, hey Dave, when we're done with the bike, you want to go for a run? Who are you? I said, well, my name's Mark Allen. And he said, oh, I think I've heard your name. And he clicked his bike into a big gear and he took off. So I figured, well, conversation with the champ's over. I clicked my bike into a big gear and I heard this clank, 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 clank. And I looked down. My derailleur had broken off and was dragging on the ground. Off-road Dave Scott, he won his second title. My race was done just past the turnaround of the bike ride. I didn't achieve that goal of crossing the finish line, but I had been with the best guy in the world for almost 4 hours of racing, which is about half the amount of time it takes the leaders to finish that race. And so suddenly the dream was born. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I give myself time to develop my fitness and skills as a triathlete, I can be the champion of this amazing race. The next year I came back and I finished in 3rd place, which certainly was something that I was very proud of. The following year I came and I finished in 5th, but I was closer to the leader, Dave Scott, at the finish line. I was still improving. The year after that, I finished in 2nd place. Now there's only one spot left. In 1987, as I prepared for my 5th Ironman, I asked myself, what can I do to get myself more fit than every other athlete in the world, including the best guy, Dave Scott? And I said, I'm going to commit to out-training everybody, even the best guy. So from January through October, my training season, I did enough swimming, cycling, and running to add up to doing 125 Ironmans worth of preparation. 15,000 miles went down into my logbook. You guys want to be an Ironman champ? Certainly hard work is part of it, but it has to be the right kind of work, doesn't it? Well, anyway, I was just putting in as much training as I could dream up. I showed up at the start line. I felt great. I spotted Dave at the swim start. We swam within sight of each other for 2.4 miles. We biked 112 miles, still within sight of each other. We ran the opening miles of that marathon almost side by side. At the half marathon point, we took the lead from the last person who had been ahead of us. One of us was going to win that race, and I was feeling great. So I thought, all right, Mr. Cottage Cheese Rinser, let's see what you got. And I dropped my pace down to a 6-minute mile. Dave Scott began to fall back, something that I knew he did not want to have happen. That gave me even more inspiration. I went even faster. He fell back even quicker. With 10 miles to go in the marathon, I was given a time split, and I was told that Dave was now 5 minutes behind me. Now let me do the math for you. 10 miles to go with a 5-minute gap. That meant that a guy who was losing time was now going to have to turn it around and make up 30 seconds a mile every single mile of those closing 10 if he was going to catch me at the finish line, and I knew there was no possible way he could do that. So with a 5-minute gap on the best guy in the world, I began to assemble the acceptance speech that I was going to give the following night at the awards ceremony. What was it going to take? I'd done 125 Ironmans worth of training, and I still couldn't come up with a victory. I couldn't do much more training than that without killing myself. Dave Scott was training a lot less than me, and he was pulling off amazing championships. What made him so effective on that race course in Kona? I could beat him everywhere else, but when it came to the biggest race in our sport, I fell short. What was going on? Now, every single person in this room has had to deal with setbacks, with disappointments, when times where you felt like you have done the work for some goal that has a lot of meaning for you, and you still came up short. But those are just moments where we're being tested of our commitment, isn't it? Are we just going to give up? Or are we going to stand back up, make the changes we need to, and take it away to the realization of those great dreams and those things that we set out to accomplish? But I thought I was ready that year, and I was so stuck in my disappointment. The following year, I did another Ironman, my 6th Ironman in Hawaii, but I didn't change anything about my training. And you know the old saying, if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to get more of what you already had? And that was not working. In my 6th Ironman, I finished in 5th place, farther out of the lead than any of my other finishes there in Kona. I was at a crossroads. 6 attempts, 6 years, 0 victories. My friends and family, the press, everybody was saying, you know what? You're not cut out for that race. It's too long, it's too hot. There's something about that island you just don't mesh with. Go to the other places where you have proved that you can be a champion, where you have proved you can beat Dave Scott and everybody else. And I was this close to saying, yeah, you guys are right, you know, because at some point maybe you are beating your head against the wall. But I had not had my best race there yet. And that was a commitment that I needed to complete, to go back to Kona until at least I had my best Ironman. Walking the marathon is not my best Ironman. Maybe my best is not enough to become the champion, but I needed to go back one more time. But if I was to go back, I knew that it had to be on very different terms. Now, if things are not working in your racing or really in your life, there really are only two kinds of adjustments that we can make, two kinds of changes that we can make. One is the way we do the work, do our training. The other is to look inside and ask that question, what is it about me that might be holding me back from the success that I'm after? That human element. But I didn't want to look in there first. So the first thing I did before I started training for Ironman number 7 was to look at my training. And I saw, you know, Saturdays I'm biking 6 hours. Sundays I'm running 2 or 3 hours. That's a big double. But you know what? I was falling apart in the Ironman between hours 6 and 8. Ironman is a one-day race, not a 2-day race. And at hour 6 at the end of the bike, when I got off the bike, I had trained my body to be ready to go get a big lunch and take a nap. Dave Scott was not going to stick around while I was napping in the Ironman. I needed to change my training so that it reflected the work that the Ironman needed me to do to be prepared physically. So in 1989, as I prepared for my 7th Ironman, I did 5 Ironman training days where I would swim 30 minutes, get out of the water, bike 7 hours, get off of my bike, and run 30 minutes. That's an 8-hour training day, and that's the kind of training the Ironman wanted me to do to get my body physically ready, physiologically ready for it. Those 5 extra days only added 10 extra hours of training onto my entire season. That's less than 2 minutes a day. Would you be willing to work less than 2 minutes a day if done in the right way to achieve the greatest dream you have for yourself? Absolutely. But I knew that I needed to look inside and ask myself, what is it about me that's holding me back from the success that I'm after? And so I just took a moment one day and reflected on the Ironman, and I realized, I'm afraid of that race. It's too long, first of all. I mean, really, who wants to go that far? It's too hot. Running a marathon in 90-degree heat, I was afraid of that. I'd ended up in the hospital 2 years earlier. I was afraid of the wind that can be a headwind all the way up to the turnaround at Hawi. And then when you see that little sign that says turn around, so does the wind. And you have a headwind all the way back. That's freaky. That scares me. And I was afraid of Dave Scott. He was so strong. And I could not see myself winning the Ironman unless he had a bad race. But Dave Scott was not going to have a bad race at the Ironman. He was always going to have his best day. So I thought I have to change these things. So I did my bike rides as much as I could into headwinds to show myself, yeah, I can do this. I'm strong enough, I can take it. I did my long runs in the middle of the day when it was the hottest, not in the morning or in the evenings when it was cooler. You know, my training partners hated me, but I said, this is what we need to do if we're going to have our best race in the heat of the big island of Hawaii. And I practiced, at least in my mind, what I was going to say to Dave Scott when I saw him at the start line. Dave, I hope you have your best race this year because I'm going to beat you. Now that was easy to say in my living room in January. 5 minutes to 7, my 7th Ironman, I felt like I was ready. I was looking around. Finally, I spotted him. Dave Scott was over to the side, warming up. I backstroked over, pretending like I didn't see him. When I got right up next to him, I turned and I go, oh, Dave, have a great race. And I stuck with him like glue. The cannon sounded. We headed out for 2.4 miles of swimming. I stayed on his feet the entire swim course. Every 3 or 4 minutes, I would just tap his foot to let him know I was back there. I knew he hated that. We biked 112 miles within sight of each other. We ran the opening miles of the marathon at an incredibly fast pace, 6 minutes or better. We headed out onto the lava fields where the real meat of the marathon takes place, about the half marathon point. Once again, we took the lead from the last person who had been ahead of us, and we were on a pace that was going to shatter the world's record. Only this time, Dave was the guy who was feeling stronger. He upped his pace to a 6-minute mile. I began to fall back. Finally, he slowed down to regroup. I caught back up to him and I go, dear God, do not let him do that again. He did it again, only this time he did not back off. And it totally blew my mind because I realized he was going to hold a 6-minute pace for the closing 13 miles of that marathon. Nobody had ever gone that fast before. And then I just totally lost it. And my mind went crazy with all that kind of stuff that does not help out in those type of situations. Dave, he's so strong, he's so fast, he's won these things. There's just no way I can beat that guy. I just want to quit. I am such a loser. Telling yourself you were a loser does not fortify you with the strength you need to become a champion. In moments like that, it's too late to go back and ask yourself, should I have done more training or less training? It's certainly too late to go back and ask myself, should I have rinsed my cottage cheese? The only thing we can change are the thoughts we're telling ourselves in those moments. And in that moment, I couldn't find a positive thought to save my life. Finally, it became so difficult to match Dave's pace that I couldn't even hold on to the negative thoughts. And my mind finally just went quiet. And in the instant my mind went quiet, the most amazing thing took place. And to describe what happened, I need to take you back 2 days before the race. I was in my hotel room just trying to pass time, flipping through a magazine, not really thinking about anything, until one page caught my attention. And it was an advertisement for a workshop that was going to take place in Mexico, teaching about a way of life from the Indians in that area, the Huichol Indians. And I would later learn that the Huichol Indians have a saying that says, it's never over until it's over. Meaning, no matter how difficult or impossible something is looking, keep going, because in the next moment, it can change around for you. And if that isn't something that can give you confidence in a tough moment, nothing can. Another thing that I would find out later that the Huichol Indians value is the ability to quiet their minds. They say when we're quiet, when we just shut off all that chatter, then we can hear the answers to the big questions in life. But anyway, what caught my attention in that moment was a picture of the two medicine men or shamans that were going to lead that workshop. One was 110-year-old Huichol Indian Don Jose, and the other was his adopted grandson, Brant Secunda. And they had a look on their face that was very peaceful but powerful. And certainly as an athlete, that's a space that we want to be in, isn't it? Feeling peace inside, but also feeling our strength, our inner confidence, or our inner trust in our own abilities. Well, anyway, let me take you back in the race. Dave Scott's surging. I'm barely able to hang on. Finally, it's so difficult to match his pace that my mind just goes quiet. And in the instant my mind went quiet, Don Jose's image came back to me. And I thought, you know what? I bet that 110-year-old Indian doesn't need to win an Ironman to feel good about his life. He's happy just to be alive. You know how that is when you wake up some mornings and you're just happy to wake up and see the sun again? You know that no matter what happens on that day, it's going to be a positive outcome. Very different than the days where you want to pull the covers over your head and crawl back in underneath the sheets, right? On those days, even the smallest to-do list is going to be a daunting task. Well, my to-do list was not looking very good. A 6-time Ironman champ is now holding a 6-minute pace, and he's going to do it for the next 13 miles. I'm ready to blow up. But suddenly, I was just happy to be there, right there. There I was. I was with the best guy in the world. There's no shame in that. Nobody else is giving him a run for his money. There's still 13 miles left to go in this race. Something might happen here. And suddenly, I could just feel my energy start to come back into my body, and the whole dynamic of the race began to change. Dave Scott had his best Ironman ever in his career that day. He broke his previous world's record by almost 18 minutes. I did my best time to that point by nearly 35. And the difference in our times at the end was a mere 58 seconds. A very small margin on a very, very long day. I went on to win 6 Ironman titles in 6 starts, the final one coming in 1995 in what perhaps was my best Ironman, where I was coming off the bike 13 and a half minutes behind Thomas Hellriegel, a guy who was 13 years younger than me. I was 37, he was 24. So I had to make up 30 seconds a mile every single mile of that marathon to pull that one off. And every one of the top 10 guys came up to me afterwards and they said, "How'd you hold it together?" They said, "I would have just given up. That's too much of a gap. I wouldn't have had the confidence to do that." And it certainly wasn't easy, but I was able to do that. I met Brant Secunda right after that first victory and began to get his help to put me together as have my inner strength of character be a little bit stronger, and that was what enabled me in '95 to just keep my mind at bay when I really wanted to quit and drop out, when I had that big gap to make up. And he and I have a book that we wrote together called Fit Soul, Fit Body, 9 Keys to a Healthier, Happier You, and we have a lot of great training principles in here, but also a lot of great tools and tips to help you deal with stress. Has anybody ever experienced stress in this room? Oh, 2 of you. We also have a lot of great tips on nutrition, how to eat for training and racing, and then also concepts on how to hopefully get a little more balance in life, to learn how to indeed quiet your mind in those tough moments. I'm sure all of you have had those thoughts that come in that didn't help you out in a tough moment, and how to sort of alleviate that into tools and practices to just adopt a more positive outlook on things, even when the world may look chaotic on the outside. Hopefully your inner environment can be a peaceful one. Certainly I have my online coaching that I've started 12 years ago. We coach people in over 50 countries. Last year we had, I think, 34 people racing in Kona. And it was a great team. It's just a fun group to work with. And so anyway, I'd like to open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions, hopefully I'll have an answer.
Doing your core brick training, what's the longest you would ever run coming off a long bike? You go like an hour, hour and a half?
50 minutes.
What at Ironman pace or just
Ooh, that's secret.
aerobic pace?
No, brick workouts, I was telling in the clinic this morning, brick workouts, which are a bike run workout. The reason they're called brick workouts is because there was a guy named Matt Brick who designed them. You know, they could have been Allens or Smiths or whatever, but they're bricks. So anyway, a brick workout is specifically to get your body to train your body to do the transition from bike to run. That happens in about 20 minutes. So any run over 20 minutes is kind of fluff. It's not meant to build your endurance to be able to do a half marathon or a marathon at the end of your half Ironman or full Ironman. The endurance you need to do that comes through your long runs and through your over distance work on the bike. Okay? If you do, let's say, a long bike and then you run 2 or 2.5 hours, all you're doing is just tearing your body down, and it's very hard to recover from. So it's best to save those type of efforts for race day.
What are you doing now? Are you doing any racing now? And are you still staying connected with Dr. Phil Maffetone?
When I stopped Ironman racing in '95, I knew that it was time. I'd lived in Boulder, Colorado, and seen a lot of athletes who had pushed themselves for many years in many different sports quit their careers because they were forced out. They were either injured or totally burned out, or they just pushed it too far, and then they ended frustrated. And I felt like in '95 at my final Ironman that I had pulled every trick out of the bag that I could think of to get as fast as I possibly could, and there was nothing more that I could bring to my racing to improve. And so it was just very clear to me that I'm done. You know, I raced 15 years as a triathlete and 12 years as a swimmer, so I have 27 years of competition going in my body, so now I'm just kind of enjoying retirement. I live in Santa Cruz, California. My 3 sports now are surfing, lifting weights, and running, in that order. And so I stay very active, but I don't do anything that pushes my body to any kind of limit. My son pushes me to a limit, but that's a different kind of... You know, everybody that I talk to who doesn't exercise regularly and who doesn't do something that develops core strength and who doesn't do something that improves flexibility, as they get older they have aches and pains. And knock on wood, I don't have those, because everything that I do is developing those things. You know, I'm working my cardiovascular system. I'm still developing strength so that all my joints and tendons and everything have the integrity they need. And the surfing is sort of like flexibility work in motion. So, you know, everything stays supple and loose. Actually, to answer your question, I do talk to Phil. I just remembered, I forgot that. After I quit racing, I thought, I got to develop all my business stuff, whatever that might be. And so for the first month and a half after I quit racing, I basically did almost no training. And, you know, my back was starting to get stiff, my neck hurt, my knees felt a little creaky and stuff, and I thought, what's going on? Did I just get old, you know, from Monday to Tuesday? And then I went out for a 30-minute run one day, and all of that went away, and I realized we are meant to move. Human beings are meant to move. We are not designed to sit in these little things for 10 hours a day, looking at this other little thing, doing this. We're meant to move.
Hi, do you have a daily supplement regimen you could expand upon if you do?
Supplements should be just that. They should supplement a good diet. You know, that's why they're called supplements. The challenge with having a good diet today in the modern world is twofold. One, because of the soils and changes in food production and everything. You know, a tomato today doesn't necessarily have the same nutrient density that it had 200 years ago. And so even if you are eating healthy, you may be getting the calories but may not be getting the nutrients that all of those foods should have. That's one challenge to not needing supplements, from getting it purely from food. A second issue is that as an athlete, you're putting your body under huge stress. And as your stress goes up, your physical stress goes up like this, your need for some nutrients goes up geometrically. So, for example, your need for omega-3 oils goes up much faster than your need for calories, a lot of other nutrients like that, because you're putting your body under this huge training stress that has to replace everything. And so again, it can be very difficult to get the nutrients you need. I use a product called Bionics. They have a website. It's the only supplement that I have found where I could actually feel a difference. Most nutritional products don't have the stuff in enough density to actually have an impact on you physiologically, or it might, but it's in a form your body can't really absorb very well, or one thing might inhibit the absorption of another. It's a very complex thing. Anyway, Bionics, if you're interested. It's not the cheapest in the world, but it's the only one I've found that actually works. You saw Dave in that video where he was passing me with the truck on that one. When I was in the lead, the way the run course went back then was that it went all the way out past the Kona airport. You had a 10-mile straight out section to this gigantic inflatable Bud Light blow-up thing. And so, for 10 miles, you could see this blow up, and it just looked like it was never going to come. And so anyway, finally I made the turn at the Bud Light can, and I headed back, and I was timing it because I wanted to see what the gap was. And as Dave was approaching from the other direction, I had my glasses on, but I was looking over. Because, when you pass your toughest competitor, you want to look as good as you possibly can so that, you make them think, even if you are not feeling good, that you're looking good. Well, when I saw him, I was going back, and he still had to head out to that thing. I looked at him, and I go, boy, he doesn't look very good. So I knew that I was in good shape. Unfortunately, about a mile after that, I could feel my energy levels start to dip. And so at the next aid station, I took a little bit extra nutrient, and it had zero effect, so that in the following aid station, I actually stopped, and I walked through and took a bunch of stuff in, and nothing was absorbing, and I knew that it was over. I knew that it was going to be a matter of time before I would eventually run out of gas. I'd have to walk, and when you walk, 5 minutes is eaten up just like that. So anyway, at that point where I was walking, and I was trying to at least walk as fast as I could. I figure I'm at about 20% of capacity here, but at least I can try and get 100% out of that. And so I was walking as fast as I could. And you have to understand that in 1987, okay? In 1980, Dave must be working the machine back there. He doesn't want me to tell this story or something. So in 1987, Dave Scott was the favorite. So even though I was in the lead of the race, they had me with camera B, a little guy on a moped. And they had Dave with camera A with this big van, with the big camera. And so I'm by myself with camera B, all in the lead. And then here comes motorcycles and cars and vans and this giant van. I mean, I knew Dave was coming. It was clear. He was coming very quickly. And I saw the van coming by, and I looked over, and just as I looked over, I could see him sneaking by on the other side of the van. And as I was walking and he was running, I was thinking, damn, he's looking pretty good now. But you can also see in that final video there where at the point where I was able to pull away from him, his shoulders came up and he started rocking, and suddenly he was having to deal with a situation that he had never dreamed of before. You see, Dave was the absolute best guy from hours 6 to 8 of that race, and he knew that if he was even in the same zip code as you, that he was going to be able to beat you. And so for me to be able to pull away in those final moments, it completely blew his mind. And then he had to deal with something that he had never thought he would have to before. And it was interesting because as my energy started to come back, I was thinking, okay, now where can I make a move? Where is the move going to be? And I could tell that on the downhills, Dave was still very strong. He was very fast. And the course in Kona, before you go to the finish line, you come down a very long, steep hill. And so I knew that if we were together on that hill, he would have the race, even though it was about a mile from the finish. He would be able to pull away, and I wouldn't be able to make it up. And so I knew that the move had to come somewhere before that. And I also noticed that on the gradual upgrades, he was starting to slow down. And so to be as much of a cat and mouse as I could. As we were going up those upgrades, even though I felt stronger, I started to drop behind him just a little bit to hopefully trick him into thinking that, well, maybe Mark's not so strong on the uphills. Right before that long downhill, there is one long last uphill, and both of us knew that. Both of us were waiting for that moment to go. And you know, there at the bottom of that hill, there was an aid station. And conventional wisdom was that, you know, with about 1.5 miles to go, you grab one last glass of whatever it is you need, slug it down, and then take off. Dave got to that aid station on the inside track, so when he went to reach over, you know, he grabbed one last glass of whatever it was he was going to get. And just as I was ready to come in behind him to grab my last glass, something just said, "Go!" It was like I was shot out of a cannon, and I pulled my hand back, and I just started sprinting as best as you can in an Ironman. And I just went as hard as I could up that last long upgrade, and in the few seconds it took Dave to reach over and look back, I'd already gained about 5 or 6 feet on him, and that's when it happened. Everything tensed up, and then the gap just began to open up. And ABC actually afterwards, they called me a couple weeks after that, and they go, "Hi, Mark, there's something that we got to tell you." They said, "The moment where you broke Dave, we don't have it on film." They said, "The cameraman was so nervous watching you two that he ran out of tape. And at the moment when you made the break, he realized he had to change the tape. So you're with him, and then you're about 20 feet ahead of him. We apologize." And it was just amazing, because here we were, hour after hour, and really the only sound there was our 2 sets of feet hitting the ground with a squish, 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 squish. And they said in the thing, you know, "Dave and Mark haven't exchanged a word from, you know, since whenever." It's like, well, what are you going to say? "Hey, you need a Coke? Can I get you something?" But the other side is that when you're in a race like that, as you probably have experienced, you really do shift into this other kind of reality where you're sensing so many things that often you don't when you're just sitting around in your living room. And I could just feel how Dave was feeling, and I knew that really ultimately he was so strong that there was no trick that I could pull that would make him break. You know, a lot of the other athletes that I race against, I knew that there was a moment where if I felt a little weakness, I could just up my pace a little bit, and they'd go, "Oh, Mark, he's a great runner, he's pulling away, I've lost, I'm not going to win it." That wasn't going to happen with Dave Scott, and that was so intimidating to run next to him knowing that I just had to outrace him somehow. And fortunately on that hill I was able to pull away and hold it, and when we hit the downhill, I already had enough of a gap that he wasn't able to close it. Yeah, I definitely recommend it for all distances, especially the shorter races, because you can just build so much fitness through that time on the bike. There still has to be a balance. Certainly, you can't forego swimming and running, but you can build a lot of your movement endurance through cycling. And one of the reasons why it's so good is that it's not an impact sport, so your recovery is fairly fast.
Okay, that is a wrap.
Woohoo! Thank you.